Have you ever noticed how some people are always moving but never arriving? They're in back-to-back meetings. They're answering emails at midnight. They're squeezing in calls during lunch. But if you ask them what they accomplished this month, they pause. They can list what they did, but they can't name what changed. The calendar is full. The progress is empty. But here's the question: why does motion feel like forward movement? Stick with me until the end, because what you'll discover might even explain why you can't sit still without feeling guilty. For some, the story is simple but revealing. They fill every gap in their schedule instinctively. Picture the knowledge worker who schedules meetings with no buffer time, who opens Slack during every quiet moment, who feels restless if there's nothing urgent to respond to. On the surface, this looks like productivity, but psychologically, it's something else entirely. It's avoidance behavior. The brain uses activity to drown out uncomfortable internal signals. When your mind is occupied with logistics, it can't process anxiety. It can't sit with grief. It can't face uncertainty. Cognitive load functions as emotional numbing. If you're thinking about the next task, you're not thinking about the question underneath it. Does this work matter? Am I avoiding something? What happens if I stop? This connects to something psychologists call intolerance of uncertainty. When outcomes are ambiguous, the brain craves control. Busyness creates the illusion of control. If you're doing something, you feel like you're managing the situation, even if that something doesn't change the outcome. And here's what happens when the calendar empties: discomfort, restlessness, the immediate urge to fill the void. When you stop moving, you have to face what you've been outrunning. So the brain rewards busyness, not because it's productive, but because it's protective. The person caught in this pattern often believes they're simply hardworking. They don't see the avoidance. They see dedication. But here's the question most people never ask: what are you actually avoiding? Because once you see the pattern, you realize something unsettling. The busyness isn't the problem, it's the solution. The problem is what you'd have to feel if you stopped. But there's another dimension to this pattern that goes beyond internal avoidance. Then there's another group, people who perform busyness as social currency. This isn't about internal avoidance, it's about external validation. We've been conditioned to equate visible effort with value. Psychologists call this the labor illusion. When someone appears to be working hard, we assume the work matters, even if the outcome is identical to someone who worked less. The startup employee who broadcasts their late nights on Slack, the caregiver who wears exhaustion as proof of dedication, the professional who responds to emails within minutes, no matter the hour. They're not just busy, they're performing busyness. And the performance has an audience, because appearing busy signals something. It signals relevance, it signals importance, it signals that you're needed. Social signaling theory explains this. We broadcast effort because we've learned that visibility equals worthiness. If you're always occupied, you must be valuable. If you're never available, you must be in demand. And here's where it becomes a trap. The busier you appear, the more valuable you seem. So you need to maintain that appearance, not because the work requires it, but because your sense of worth depends on it. The performance has become the identity. If you stop performing busyness, you fear becoming invisible. Because if your value is tied to your availability, what happens when you're not available? So you stay busy, not because the tasks matter, but because stopping feels like disappearing. Here's the deeper mechanism. Busyness becomes a wall. It protects you from intimacy, from vulnerability, from self-reflection. If you're always occupied, no one can ask you difficult questions, including yourself. The question of whether your work matters, the question of whether you matter. These questions require stillness. So most people choose motion instead. Which brings us to the most unsettling part. Both patterns reveal the same thing, a fear of what we might discover in stillness. For some, busyness drowns out internal discomfort. For others, it performs external value. But underneath both is the same question. What are you actually running from? And this pattern doesn't stop at work. It extends to how we consume content, how we structure relationships, how we avoid difficult conversations. We fill every gap with noise because silence forces confrontation, not with others, with ourselves. The most sobering realization: if you never stop moving, you never have to ask if you're going in the right direction. You can spend an entire life in motion and arrive nowhere, because the brain rewards the feeling of progress, not progress itself. Motion feels productive. But motion isn't movement, and busyness isn't purpose. Over time, the exhaustion becomes proof. Proof that you're trying, proof that you're committed, proof that you're enough. But the question remains: what are you proving, and to whom? If this resonates, I explore more behavioral psychology on this channel. Subscribe if you want to understand the patterns you can't see while you're in them, and if you want to go deeper, there's a community link in the description. No prescriptions, just recognition. Because sometimes seeing the pattern is enough. The real question is, which one are you?